Jeffrey Myers of Tree of Life. This section is going to be interactive. That's probably something most of you who on Zoom are not used to, where you watch and you're muted throughout of it. This will be hopefully an interactive conversation. So when there are opportunities to interact, I welcome your interaction, your thoughts, and just at the right moment, unmute yourself. But please remember, when you're done, kindly mute yourself again so we can have everyone who'd like to comment at any point comment. The Torah has a great number of expectations of all of us, all pointing towards our achieving the best possible versions of ourselves. For many, some of the mitzvot we perform are on automatic pilot, possibly not even conscious that we do them. Other mitzvot require concentration and effort. In the end, the more that we are able to do in an autopilot mode, the more we have integrated into our beings and have moved upwards in our goal of becoming as godly as possible. One of these mitzvot is called Hachnasat Orchim, the welcoming of guests, or more cogently, hospitality. I have heard traditions of stories from Europe of worshipers fighting over synagogue guests for the privilege of hosting them for a Shabbat meal. Hachnasat Orchim does not exist in a vacuum, but be connected to Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your neighbor as yourself. That is, treating others as you wish to be treated. Hospitality should beget hospitality, although I have no doubt that many of you present can share stories that are uplifting and stories that are disappointing, if not repulsive to some. That's not our goal this evening. Tonight, we are going to observe the Shavuot custom of text study and look at 3 totally different texts to see what we can glean from them about Jewish attitudes towards hospitality. For those of you unfamiliar with the backdrop scene behind me, it's taken from the classic movie, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Some of you present may not have been alive when that movie came out. You should recognize behind me the famed Sidney Poitier, Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, and for extra credit, to see if anyone remembers who is Sidney Poitier's female friend. You get an extra piece of cheesecake if you know the answer to that one. So I'm going to be sharing text on the screen. I'll ask Eric if you could pull that up now. I'll do my best to be able to call upon you, recognizing that if you're familiar with Zoom, I can't see every screen that's present, so you may just have to unmute and possibly just call out and answer when I ask it. First text we're taking to is Abraham. If you could scroll to the English, please, Eric. I put the Hebrew here, not to be disrespectful to anybody's language skills, but we're going to look at the English. So I'm going to take a moment and just read this brief translation to you. This is taken from Safari's version. There are many versions of English text out there. This is one. The Lord appeared to him by the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, "My lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought. Bathe your feet and recline under the tree, and let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves. Then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way." They replied, "Do as you have said." Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quick, 3 seahs of choice flour. Knead and make cakes." Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to a servant boy, who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them, and he waited on them under the tree as they ate. Let's ignore the ramifications of kashrut, shall we? Leave that for another day. But as I read it aloud, I want you to think for a moment and pay special attention to the verbs in the text. What are the verbs that we encounter? Listen to this set of verbs. Ran, greet, bowing, refresh, hastened, quick, need, make cakes, ran, hastened, waited on them. From these verbs, what do we learn? Any thoughts? If you have a comment, just unmute.
Provide for your guest.
Okay. Anyone else? What do we learn?
I would agree with that.
Okay. Anyone else? Notice how frequently verbs that imply not just action, which all verbs do, but a speediness to those verbs. When you find ran, hasten, things like that, you find not mere action, but quick, as though there's something going on beyond merely the speed that Abraham is doing this. Might anyone recall at the end of the portion that just precedes this portion, Vayera, what has just transpired, particularly as it involves Abraham? Anyone recall what happened to Abraham just before this?
They were in the tent.
He's sitting outside the tent. What has just happened before this? Anyone recall?
He's just been circumcised.
Yes, he circumcised himself. Let's not go into what that might mean, other than to anticipate that there's probably a little bit of recuperation going on, shall we say. So the fact that he just circumcised himself and it is up and around and doing this, we'll have to say is Abraham, God bless you, man, to be able to up and run around and do that quickly. Notice right at the beginning of the text, it appears by saying, the Lord appeared to him by the terebinths of Mamre. And then the next verse, looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. What is that suggesting to us? Do a little math. The 2 verses, one next to the other. What is a possibility here?
Rabbi.
The possibility is one of the 3 men is God in human guise. Because it says the Lord appeared to him. It doesn't say then the Lord left. The Lord hasn't said anything. It says the Lord appeared by him. Next thing, he sees 3 men. So it is indeed possible, as many commentators have suggested, one of the 3 men standing before him is God. Does Abraham know that God is in his presence? Does the text intimate that at all?
No, that I know.
Not at all. So he does not know this at all, which is telling him that this is his response to guests, not even knowing that one of those guests is indeed God.
Some interpretations say 3 strangers that he didn't even know them.
Well, yeah, well, it's, yes, they are strangers. He does not know them
So he
at
was
all.
kind to a stranger.
Yeah. So what do you think of Abraham's response to 3 strangers passing by?
I wonder if maybe he does know, first of all, because there's a weird usage in the Hebrew that at the beginning of verse 3, it's Vayomer Adonai. And that Adonai is in quotes, Vayomer Adonai. He says, my lords, but he says it in the same word that we now use to call God.
Indeed.
But not spelled like Yud He Vav He, spelled as would expect Adonai to be.
I don't know.
So it isn't clear. That's what makes this text so really interesting. Does he know? Does he not know? it's not totally clear what's going on. Some commentators suggest that Abraham does recognize these are not three ordinary people passing by. There's something more to them. Whether it is, as Jonathan suggested, Tessa saying one of them is God, or earthly angels on a mission, we know later they are. But initially, we're not clear on who they are. But certainly one thing is clear here, and that is this seems to be some sort of frequent practice. Commentators suggest that Abraham was sitting outside his tent because he would regularly do that and be sort of waiting. And anytime someone would be passing by, he would rush to greet them. This was his regular practice. That this is not a special practice that he's doing solely because of these three men. This was the regular Abraham that we are seeing here. How does Sarah respond when he runs and commands her what to do? Does she say anything? No.
She doesn't.
She says nothing, but clearly we know that she does prepare the food. So we don't know if she's thinking in her mind, "Oi, Abraham again with this welcoming of strangers nonsense. Enough is enough. You want to greet them? You cook it." We don't see that happening at all. Does she recognize this is her fate? This guy just likes to greet people and I've got to regularly do this? We don't know what goes on in her mind other than the fact that she does respond instantly, apparently, to what Abraham expects of her. And if you look at the feast that he prepares, it's a rather elegant feast. First off, he gets water to clean their feet. If you've ever walked in a sandy area for a great distance, I recognize that for most of you, if you're native in Pittsburgh, unless you've been to the Jersey Shore, you don't know what it's like to get sandy and dry feet like that. But I can assure you, after a while of like that, they can get really irritated from that. So to go and wash off their feet is an incredibly generous gesture, far beyond what one would expect, to give them a place to sit, to run and have his wife cook and prepare, and they serve all of this quickly to guests, is an incredible response. So if you would summarize this, what might you say the Torah is teaching us? In other words, why is this episode here? Independent of the fact that we're about to hear about the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah. Let's leave that piece alone for a moment and find out, why is this here in the Torah? What might it be teaching us? Any thoughts, anybody?
How to be nice to strangers.
Okay.
And doesn't this follow when the strangers tell Sarah she's going to have a child, or is that later on?
That hasn't occurred yet.
Okay.
That's soon.
So it's kind of a reward for his kindness.
Okay, possibly. Yeah. The interesting thing is that in the Torah, and particularly latter generations of commentators, all have said the same thing. This is the, with a capital T, example of Haknasat Orchim in the Torah. This is how you're supposed to greet strangers. It might be a little harder to think from that perspective in today's world, meaning that you have your chaise lounge out in front of your domicile in Pittsburgh, and that anybody who passes by, you quick run and do these sorts of things. That might be a little bit out of the ordinary. But for Abraham and Sarah, this was the ordinary. But it does teach us that we are to do all that we can to be welcoming of guests. First off, to invite them into your place. Strangers, people you do not know. To offer them the courtesies that you would hope you would wish to receive yourself if you were traveling in a strange place. and that you would do the things that you would hope people would do to make you welcome, the Torah has set this section up as the preeminent example of what's expected of all of us. And it's from this section that the whole concept of Hachnasa Orchim develops over the centuries. So this is the piece that tells us about Hachnasa Orchim. But it's not the only piece of Hachnasa Orchim. So I want to take a look at the next example, which is really timely because it's from Megillat Ruth. This will be read on the second day of Shavuot. It's a rather lengthy portion. I'm not going to read verse by verse by verse of it because there is a great deal there. But I'm going to try to unpack the essence of what is happening in this section on it. But just to set the stage, for those of you who just might not be familiar with the book of Ruth, permit me just a few moments to just bring you up to speed what happens up to this point. For those of you who already know the story well, I beg your indulgence just to set it so everyone's on the same place. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, suddenly ups and dies. She has 2 sons also. Both of them also very shortly up and die. We don't know if it was COVID-19 version back then. The text doesn't tell us that, but all of them die. Naomi says to her daughter-in-laws, I have nothing to offer you. I'm a widow now. Don't have to stay with me. You're both young women. Go back to your ancestral homes. You could be eligible wives once again and be able to marry and have a life. There's nothing I can offer you here. She has 2 daughter-in-laws. One is Orpah, the other is Ruth. As an aside, by the way, the name Orpah was misspelled by a now famous celebrity's mother in the hospital. So Orpah Winfrey became Oprah Winfrey because of a misspelling. But nevertheless, just a bit of trivia, I digress. She convinces Orpah to return to her ancestral home. Naomi, in one of the most selfless moments in all of the Bible, says, no, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God. It's at that moment that, according to biblical scholars, she has accepted Judaism and has converted, because the rites and rituals that we now know today did not exist to that extent. So by saying this out loud, she has literally converted. Well, they've returned back to Beersheba because that's where Naomi is from. That's where the family lands are. Ruth says to her mother-in-law, she's going to go to the fields and glean the ears of grain behind someone who may show me kindness. So the opening question for us before we get into any more of the story is, why would Naomi, or rather, why would Ruth be going out to glean the fields? What can anyone share about why that might be happening? For those of you who might be familiar with what gleaning is about. Anybody?
That was the tradition that you leave some of the grain for the poor, isn't it right? And people who are poor come and can take if you own the fields.
One of the mitzvot in the Torah is called peah. What it refers to specifically is that when you would harvest your field, whatever it was that you're growing, you're not permitted to harvest the corners. You're to leave the corners unharvested so that those in need might freely harvest. You were also not permitted to pick up any stray harvest that had fallen out of the cart along the way, so that the work animals, such as the oxen, could eat it, or, again, anyone in need might be able to pick that up and utilize that. So if it was a field of corn, for example, and some of the husks had fallen off of the cart, you may not go and pick them back up. They must remain there, as well as the corners. The corners are unharvested so that any in need would be able to do that. But why is she going to do it? There's only one reason. The only reason you would go and glean is because you were in need.
War.
So what that's telling us is that the financial state of Ruth and Naomi is a very precarious one. Otherwise, she would not need to go and glean. So by the fact that she is going to do it, number one, what a generous character she is, that she's going to go out and do this, obviously to take care of herself, but also take care of her mother-in-law, which she doesn't have a responsibility to do. But yet she does that. But notice, behind someone who may show me kindness, she's going out. She doesn't know where. She doesn't know what field to go to because she's a stranger in the town. She doesn't have her GPS handy to direct her to somebody's field. She's going to wander out and, in essence, show blind faith that somehow God's going to direct her to the right place and that there's going to be someone kind there who will be able to assist her to do that. So they did do that. And obviously, in a sign that God's hand is behind this in mysterious ways that we never understand. The piece of land they go to belongs to Boaz. Boaz is part of Elimelech's family, a cousin. So it was beshert. It was meant to be that they went back to Bethlehem. And in Bethlehem lives Boaz, who's a wealthy landowner. And she goes to Boaz's property to glean. It could have been some other. She could have made a left instead of a right. So here we see God's hand is there. So I think the text is showing us this was not just pure luck. This is divine providence. God is engaged in this story. If we could scroll up a little further, please, Eric. Not up, down, rather. I meant to say to the English. Okay, let's pause right there. So Boaz asked the reapers, to the servant in charge of the reapers, whose girl is that? The servant in charge of the reapers replied, she's a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. Then the servant includes his own commentary. She's been in her feet ever since she came this morning. She's rested but little in the hut. So let's just pause for a moment. If you've ever gleaned in the hot sun, you know you can't stay in the hot sun all day. You need shade. So it was commonplace that they do that. So what would they have in the middle of these fields? A sukkah. That was the norm. They were easy to build, of the materials right there. So Sukkot would be found throughout, regardless of the season. We think of Sukkot only for the fall. Sukkot were also built when it was barley harvest time, which this is. Winter wheat harvest time. Whatever the season, people would build Sukkot. So Boaz then approaches her. Listen to me, daughter. Don't go glean in another field. Don't go elsewhere. Stay here close to my girls. Keep your eyes on the field they are reaping and follow them. I have ordered the men not to molest you. We'll deal with that whole issue a different time, but not tonight. And when you are thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water. So, how does Boaz initially respond to her? What do we find of Boaz's behavior here? Any thoughts, anybody?
I think he knew that was part of his family. So he's very
Actually, he doesn't necessarily know that yet.
okay. But then
He
he's
treats-
just kind. He's just a kind.
He treats
person.
her with kindness and hospitality.
Yeah. And who is she?
Nobody he knows.
Exactly. As far as we know right now, the text has not told us that he knows that she's mishpacha in some way. We don't know if he knows that, is what I'm saying. We'll find out later if he does know that, but for the moment, it's not clear that he knows that. He doesn't treat her like that. He doesn't welcome her, by saying, "You're a member of my family." No, you just go home and I'll ship the grain over to you. So, based upon this, it doesn't seem at this moment that he knows that she is part of the family. And how does Ruth respond? She prostrates herself on her face to the ground. In other words, she lays flat on the ground and asks him, "Why are you so kind to me? I'm a foreigner." So what is Ruth's response to all of this? Gratitude for the hospitality. Does Boaz's kindness continue?
Yes,
It does.
it does. Throughout the whole story.
Well, Boaz suddenly realizes who he recognizes her somehow.
Well, he tells the story, but he doesn't say yet if he's a member of the family, because he says, "I've been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your mother and father in the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known before. May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge." Does he let on that he knows that she's family somewhere?
No.
The text doesn't seem to tell us that yet.
But he evidently has been doing that all along, leaving the corners for poor people.
Well, yeah,
Don't you think?
because it is a mitzvah in the land of Israel. It's later in the Torah. This is Megillat Ruth, which takes place centuries after that. This is common practice of all Israeli farmers. This is what's expected of them. But he's not done yet. He continues at mealtime when he calls her and says, "Come over here and partake of the meal and dip your morsel in the vinegar." That's customary. It harkens back to the most ancient of days. We reenact a part of that in the Passover Seder, when we dip our food in something. This was customary, to dip your food in a little bit of, in this case, vinegar. That was normal, that you would dip your food in a dip. That's how they ate back then. We do that in the Seder. So she sits down beside the reapers. He hands her roasted grain. She eats and has some left over. Still, Boaz is not done. He's given her a meal. Did he have to do that?
No.
No. But he did that. And he's still not done. When she gets up again to continue gleaning, now think of this. She's been there since literally the sun is up. She's barely taken a break. They've sat to eat. She gets up and is still gleaning. I don't know if you've ever gleaned. I've done some on one of my journeys to Israel on a kibbutz. It's tiring work, I must tell you. Also, I was a rookie at it, so that makes it a lot harder because you're not efficient. But gleaning is really hard work. So she gets up and she's going to glean some more. So what does Boaz say to his workers? You are not only to let her glean among the sheaves without interference, but you must also pull some stalks out of the heaps and leave them for her to glean, and not scold her. So, not only is she taking the gleanings from the corners, but to take some of what his men have harvested and lay it out there for her to make her job easier. So she gleaned from sunrise to sunset to evening. But then not only is she done, when the evening comes, she beats out what she's gleaned. So what is that about? You have to remember, to glean means to first cut down the stalks. And we're talking about barley. This is the barley harvest, because at this time of year in the land of Israel, it's the barley harvest. And the text will tell us that in a moment. So after you've cut it down, you need to then beat it, meaning you need to then smack it to loosen the barley from the sheaf and the rest of the plant, because all that you want is the barley. You don't want the husk and the other parts of the growth, the chaff, everything else. You want merely the barley part of it to do that. And then it tells us, then she beat out what she'd gleaned, was about an ephah of barley. For those of you who don't know about biblical weights and measures, an ephah of barley, how much is an ephah? An ephah is roughly equivalent to a bushel. Now, unless you've lived on farms or worked, you have no idea what a bushel is. A bushel is 8 dry gallons. A dry gallon is about 8 pounds of grain. 8 pounds of grain. That's a lot of gleaning.
Mhm.
So she then brings home 8 pounds of grain to her mother-in-law. And then we find out that at the end, when she goes home, Naomi says to her, where did you glean? She told her, she said, the name of the man with whom I worked is Boaz. And then she learns that Boaz is later on a redeeming kinsman. That's a whole nother story for another day. If you want to join Shul in Tree of Life, on Tuesday, when I be reading Megillat Esther, we'll be talking about what does it mean to be a redeeming kinsman. So just a plug, if you want to come to Shul, you're welcome to join us on Tuesday morning. So what are we taught about Hachnasat Orchim from this episode? What did we learn here? What's the lesson that Megillat Ruth is teaching us? Anybody?
Kindness also. Kindness to a stranger, to someone that you really don't know.
Right. Welcoming a stranger.
Yeah.
We see, again, a consistent model of welcoming a stranger, but not merely welcoming. Making sure that she had a safe environment to work in, because you notice the phrase, make sure that the men didn't molest her. What a horrible thing to think of. But that there was water for her to drink. He invited her to come sit and eat with him. Showed her the utmost of kindness, of being welcome. And Boaz modeled welcoming strangers. Just as Abraham and Sarah did, so did Boaz. One more story to look at. This last one is the story of Rachav. This is taken from the book of Joshua. As Moses' anointed successor, he has been tasked to lead the Israelites into the promised land. As we know, not only does he have to see to it that each tribe settles in their allotted portion in the region, but Joshua is also responsible for the safety and security of the entire Israelite nation. We all know the famous story of Joshua conquering Jericho and that famous gospel hymn that came out of that story. But some of you may not be familiar with the lead-in to that story. How did it happen? What occurred? Was there any precursor to it? So we're going to jump into the story of Rachav. In something that might sound familiar to you, Joshua sends 2 spies from Shittim. Shittim is where they are encamped right now. Go reconnoiter the region of Jericho. For some of you, that might harken back to the portion Shalach Lecha, when they sent in the 12 spies, the Meraglim, to tour around the land to bring back the story. Well, so they sent them, and what happens? He's sending them so they can draw up the plans of attack. This is a military mission. Since it's not going to be a one-day effort, because Jericho was a rather massive city-state in its day. They need lodging. Why would lodging be a problem? Shouldn't it be easy to just go to the Motel 6 in Jericho? You don't want to make a big commotion, so you're not going to go to the Hilton. Shouldn't that be easy? The answer is no.
Oh, they were
Because-
extra serious.
Because unless they were really well dressed as the people of Jericho, they would have been noticed right away because of their garb and the fact that they were strangers. So people would wonder, why are these 2 men here? So where did they stay? We're introduced to Rachav. the text here tells us that they stay in the house of a harlot. So let's take a moment and just unpack that. In Hebrew, they say Beit Isha Zona. Literally, a prostitute's house. Was that a safe choice? Of all places? Was that a conscious choice that they would go there? Now, obviously, anyone who's going to answer, be careful. That means you know something about houses of prostitution that maybe you shouldn't know. So be very careful in how you answer this question. So why would they go there? Think for a moment of the people who would frequent that place.
They wouldn't tell.
They aren't going to tell.
That's right.
That's not a place where there would be the media to be able to share who was there. We don't have anyone from CNN camped outside watching the comings and goings at Rahav's institution there, shall we say. So actually, it's a good choice because there are only secrets in a Beit Isha Zona. It's not a public forum. No one's going to know about that. But yet somehow the king of Jericho finds out.
He may have been there himself.
So either the king was there a little bit before, I don't know, or very likely at least one of his soldiers may have frequented this important institution in the life of Jericho. Whatever the reason, word gets back to the king of Jericho that there are Israelites spying on the country. We don't know how they know that, but logic tells us if there were Israelites there, what other reason would they have? It's not that you could look on your AAA travel log and see listed, oh, Rahav's place, great place to visit and stay. 5-star institution. They wouldn't know that. So clearly, word spreads quickly, and the king sends orders to Rahav. Produce the men who came to you and entered your house, for they have come to spy on the whole country. And what does Rahav do?
She hides them.
She hides them. But she doesn't only hide them, she lies to the king. What does she say? It's true. The men did come to me. But I didn't know where they were from. They had money. I don't care. It's a house of prostitution. I don't ask those questions. And at dark, when the gate was about to be closed, the men left. I didn't know who they are. I don't know where they came from. I don't know where they went. None of that. Quick, if you go now, they just closed the gates. You can go get them. But what did she do? She hid them on the roof of her house under stalks of flax. Now, why are there stalks of flax on the roof of a house?
That was the roof. That was the thatch on the sukkah, right? On the roof.
That was the
Not
covering.
exactly. Flax is
Covering.
It's harvested. When it's harvested, it's green. You put the flax on the roof because in the hot sun, the flax is going to dry out.
Oh,
Because there was no place to put it. So if you have a flat roof, you put the harvested greens on the roof. In the hot sun, give it a couple of days, laying out like that, it's going to dry. And then it can be used for many purposes. But it needs a flat place in the sun to dry. That's the purpose of why the flax is on the roof. Clearly there's enough of it on the roof, enough depth of it, that the men can be covered with it and you don't know that they're there. So if you think about a human body laying down, there's got to be at least 1 foot of depth of the flax, right? If not, maybe even 18 inches to 2 feet's worth of flax on the roof. That's a lot of flax. And it's up there. Well, so the soldiers went and chased them, but they couldn't find them. So what then happens? First, we have to learn, why did Rachav do this? That's the important question. And we find in the middle of the page here the following. She says to the men, I know that the Lord has given the country to you, and all the inhabitants of the land are quaking before you. Huh? How does Rachav know that the Israelite God has made it such that this country is going to be theirs? You have to remember that in the ancient world, word traveled fast between messengers. Unlike the media of today where it's instant, some things were yet instant. All it took was one witness to something who would quick get on the fastest transportation available, and word would spread. Word would also spread through merchants who would be passing from one place to another. You have to remember that ancient Egypt was an important trading post. People would travel along the shore of the land of Israel. They would continue up to where it was Phoenicia, because Phoenicians were sailors. So you would have this trade route that would come from Phoenicia, which is current-day Lebanon, along the coastal line of Israel, straight down into Egypt. So trading was going on. Jericho was a major outpost for trading, because they would then go into the northeast, and they would go into Syria and into Babylonia from there. So what does she know? She knows, we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Sea of Reeds for you when you left Egypt, and what you did to Sichon and Og, the two Amorite kings across the Jordan, whom you doomed. When we heard about it, we lost heart, and no man had any more spirit left because of you. For the Lord your God is the only God in heaven above and on the earth below. So word of the acts of the Israelite God have spread really quickly throughout the region. And the inhabitants not only know it, but as she says it, they know that they themselves are doomed. That if Egypt could not be able to beat back the Israelite God, what chance does the city of Jericho have, the city-state of Jericho, to do that? And not only that, look at the phrase she utters. For the Lord your God is the only God in heaven above and on earth below. Does that phrase sound familiar? Where have we heard something similar to that in what we've just studied tonight? Someone else uttered it.
Ruth.
Ruth said the same thing. So according to later commentators, it was at this moment that Rachav converted. Later stories tell us, while we don't have full disclosure on it, that Rachav later did join the Israelite society after Jericho is indeed conquered. Well, she's a smart businesswoman. You have to be to run a house of prostitution, because you have to pay off certain governmental agencies to be able to stay in business. Now, she's smart enough to know they're going to come and conquer the city. What's most important to her? That she and her family survive. She's a smart businesswoman. So what does she say to them? Since I have shown loyalty to you, swear to me by the Lord, meaning your Israelite God, but now my God, that you in turn will show loyalty to my family. Provide me with a reliable sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and save us from death. How do the two spies answer? Our persons are pledged for yours, even to death. If you do not disclose this mission of ours, we will show you true loyalty when the Lord gives us the land. So she asks them to swear on their lives. They do. We'll see in a moment. How does she then have proof of that? So what does she do? She lets them down by a rope through the window. For her dwelling was at the outer side of the city wall, and she lived in the actual wall. If you've ever been in the city of David and gone through the walls and toured the city of David, you can see, if you're lucky enough, that there were people who had homes that lived inside the walls proper. Now, the walls were not merely just, one brick width. The walls were much wider than that. Sections of walls were 2 to 3 sets of walls on one side, 15 or 20 feet, and then another set of walls there, the interior walls. Enough space where people could live. So people did live inside the walls because there was sufficient space. She was one of those people who had a domicile that was inside the city wall, so she had the outer wall as a window to the outside. She let them down, and she even told them how they should go. Make to the hills, for the pursuers may not come upon you. Stay there in hiding the 3 days until the pursuers return, then go your way. So she even knew how the military behaved. What an incredible person. And what did they do? They gave her a crimson cord. So what did she do? She tied a crimson cord around the window so it hung down. That was the outward sign to the Israelites when they came and conquered. They did see the crimson cord. They rescued her family. And as I said, tradition tells us that they then became part of the Israelite family. She herself had converted at this time. Well, here's this peculiar story of 2 men being hidden by a woman who runs a house of prostitution. How is this hachnasat orchim? How is this fulfilling the biblical mandate of hospitality?
She gave refuge.
Okay.
These, because she knew, what she said, that they were rightful owners of the land.
Well, she didn't exactly know that.
Well,
But she did know, they heard enough of the stories to know we have no defense against the Israelite God. It is clear that Jericho will be conquered by your God. And she was a smart enough woman to know that unless I myself do something about this, I will suffer the same fate as all. So this is probably a bit more on the selfish side of taking care of herself, but nonetheless, in this sort of unique way, she did offer sanctuary, a safe place to stay. So this is, in its own unique way, a type of hospitality in that the men did have potential danger. They were certainly exposed to danger when word came. She did keep them safe. She did offer hospitality to that extent that she offered a safe place for them to stay. In return, she was rewarded, but that's because she was a smart businesswoman who struck a really good bargain with them and a deal in which it did save her family. So some might say, yeah, hers was not out of the pure goodness of her heart type of thing, like Abraham or like Ruth. Hers was more of a selfish type of hospitality. Indeed, we could very well look at it in that way, but in the end, she did keep them safe. She did not threaten them in any way, but she knew she had a bargaining chip by saying, I kept you safe, and by me keeping you safe, you need to now bargain with me, or else I can still turn you in. I still have that. And how are you going to get out of the city? Unless I have the rope to lower you down, you can't leave. I'll just send the word out and you're doomed. So she had the upper hand there. So some might say, that's less of a mitzvah, really, than what the others we have seen. But I shared this with you because in the scheme of things, the rabbis of old looked at this and said, yeah, despite the things that I'm mentioning to you now, we're still going to look at this as an example of hachnasat orchim, because despite the answers that she gave, she did offer safety and security to 2 people when she didn't have to. She could have just chased them away. She and her family could have just up and fled. They didn't have to stay there. She stayed, and she did offer a safe place, and the 2 men survived because of her. So it's because of that righteous act that it was deemed that she was eligible to join the Israelites and become part of their society. So, 3 disparate stories, one crimson cord that runs through all 3 of them. That's the concept of Hachnasat Orchim. And these are the 3 extant examples that we find. There are other smaller versions in the Tanakh, but these are the 3 that stand out to us to be able to teach us that we may not always want to be welcoming to others. You may have to have, for example, the boss and the boss's spouse or significant other over to your home for dinner when you really don't want to have them. Or you may be stuck going to that family dinner with family that you really can't stand. We all go through those things. In the end, the Torah teaches us that the real thing we need to do is recognize how we want to be treated is how we must treat others. And Hachnasot Orchim stands as one of those examples that when we welcome others, the word spreads around to all that by being someone who offers Hachnasat Orchim, hospitality to guests, that word does spread and other people will know and know you as a person who is hospitable to others. And that is indeed what the mitzvah is all about. So I think I've used up the allotted time that I'm supposed to have for now. I'd like to thank all of you for your time, for spending it with me. You could have been in a different class or just not attended at all. So I thank you for your attention. I hope that you find the other classes this evening interesting. And in advance to everyone, Shavua Tov, as well as a Chag Sameach to all of you. Remember, you can eat all the dairy you want on Yom Tov. There are no calories on Yom Tov.
I love the picture in the back.
Thank you, Eric, for hosting. Appreciate your time, Eric.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, everyone.